Other areas, we're hearing about warehouses and factories being torched and burned. Earlier on, a traffic jam of looters trying to get to a point where they can loot. Let's talk to Nozintombi Miya, who's just outside the head office at Auckland Park. Nozintombi Miya, where were you today and what did you see?
Thank you so much, Peter. We were in Alexandra, just by the intersection next to the Pan-Alex Mall, the Pan-African Mall. And we've had to move out of that area for our safety because the protesters were starting to encroach closer to that particular area we were, where the army was patrolling and keeping guard. So the large contingent that had come in to relieve the earlier army enforcement or deployment that was there had now started to move out to quell the sporadic bits of looting or protesting that was going on. As we were leaving, we were hearing the sounds of, rubber bullets going off as the police were trying to chase off the police, and the army were trying to chase off some of the protesters or some of the looters. So for our safety as the media crew, we do know that the media has been quite under siege in this particular period while the looting has been going on. We had to then move to a safer location outside headquarters. But the situation, it was unfolding, it was continuing, and the biggest concern for safety is because of how dark it is and how closely cluttered it is in Alex. I mean, it's quite a closely cluttered area, and it's quite difficult for the SANDF as well as the police to really navigate through the area where the residents are staying. So as the residents are circling around, waiting in the outskirts just off where there's light, it becomes quite difficult for them to really properly enforce and be able to protect the media or keep an eye out on the media, as well as making sure that the protesters don't get out of hand and go into the shops, because they've been eagerly waiting to get into the rest of the shops that were not completely looted. Peter.
So the story of the last few days has been a police force completely overwhelmed. Is that the sense you were getting today, even though the army had arrived? And of course there are sensitivities around the army because that's where the soldiers killed somebody at the beginning of the COVID pandemic.
Certainly, and you're quite right, Peter. That was one of the stories that I myself covered along with my colleagues. So there definitely is a lot of tension in Alex, specifically around the army. So there'll be the residents and the possible looters would be a lot more wary of the army. But throughout the course of the day, the police force that was in Alex they were facing quite a large crowd of people, and I think they were quite demoralized at that point. Some of the people that we spoke to, the passerbys, the taxi drivers that would stop and chat with us, were telling us how that entire area was absolutely overrun and it was chaos and pandemonium, and the police absolutely couldn't do anything until around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the SANDF was deployed to Alex to really get in there and give the police backup. And we do know that the SANDF has been extremely careful to ensure that they don't use any live ammunition. And one of the gentlemen that we spoke to told us, obviously on condition of anonymity because they can't really speak to the media, that the army they've been told strictly, they've been given strict instructions not to engage in gunfire exchanges with any of the civilians, and to ensure that what they do is try to dissuade and disperse and give backup to the police. And once the army, the first unit of army deployees got into Alex, they really started pushing the momentum and starting pushing the protesters out of the areas that saw the Capitec looted, the shops in the area looted, the butcheries, the nearby fruit and veg, a lot of really critical shops and businesses and small little stores that are usually thriving in Alex. So they were able to quell that, but I mean, in its wake was just a litter of disaster. And when the second deployment of SANDF members, a fresh deployment, came in at about 7:30, just after 7:30, it really helped to bolster the police unit and the private police security that we saw. And we started seeing more of the JMPD cars, more of the police cars, more of the private security cars, because now they were starting to become a lot more confident and emboldened. And obviously they were also emboldened by the visit by the Minister of Police, who came there and gave some compelling stats, and also spoke about, he acknowledged the police's shortcomings, but he also gave a glimmer of hope with the additional assistance of the army. And Peter, what I thought was quite interesting that came out of the information that was given by the minister was that 37 people had been arrested in Alex within a 24 period. And this really points to how bad the situation is. But the fact that we are seeing a positive number of arrests means that we are seeing the police starting to slowly claw their way back into maintaining some sort of law and order. But it's far from over. And, Peter, some of the statistics that I was reading a little bit earlier from a statement that was released by the National Police is that over 1,200 people have been arrested nationwide for looting. And of those people that have been protesting, more than 100 people have died, including a police officer. And these are really grim numbers that are coming out from National. And it's going to be absolutely important for the police, the SANDF, as well as all the security forces to work together with businesses, with civilians that are also willing to assist, to try and make sure they stamp out and root out the cause of the protests. And police intelligence, again, this is what we're hearing security experts say. Police intelligence is going to be critical, and how they use that police intelligence effectively will really be the deciding factor in turning the tide in this situation, Peter.
I know that it must be difficult to try and talk to people in the middle of looting, but have you been able to get a sense of who are these people and what they're doing? Because this started off as protests for former President Jacob Zuma. At some point, it just turned to become looting and criminality, and now those lines have been blurred. Do you think there are still protesters in and amongst this, or has that faded?
Peter, what we saw, obviously the light of day was fading as we got to Alex, but what we saw was a lot of young people who you could see the look of hunger and desperation on their faces. And, this talks to a broader issue of the unemployment in the country. Yes, the spark that caused the protest was as a result of protesters in support of former President Jacob Zuma, and then it moved into criminality. But what we're dealing with now are issues that are more endemic, issues around lack of jobs. We're dealing around the issue of people who've been retrenched as a result of the lockdown, as a result of companies closing down because we've had this lockdown. Yes, of course, these are measures that are being put into place to keep people safe against the COVID, but the result has been such a massive amount of pressure on the economy, on the people. These are people who need these day jobs, the garden people, the people who work with their hands and need access to these jobs, and they're not getting these jobs. So when the opportunity presents itself to loot, yes, it is a criminality, but it's also driven by hunger, because many of them are hungry, and this food and these items that they've taken it will be food that will help sustain them for a few days. And while on that one hand, that is the issue, on the other hand, the problem is that they've now gone and destroyed their own facilities and their own resources. In the next few days, we know that SASSA grants will be paid out. What then happens to the elderly and the vulnerable that need to use those facilities, that need to go to those malls that have now been absolutely gutted, some set on fire? There's no facilities, there's no resources. We do know that the cash in transit trucks are refusing to go and put in money up until their safety is assured, or up until the protests have been quelled. the knock-on effect then means that we have so many of our vulnerable in society, such as the elderly, such as young people, such as those from child-headed households, and those that survive on social welfare, not then being able to have access to go and collect these grants, because all the ATMs have been destroyed, the post offices have been destroyed, the shops such as Pick and Pay, Spar, and some of the other smaller shops where they are able to go and take out money have been destroyed, and they don't have money to then go into the cities to then try and collect their grants. So the knock-on effect of this criminality and the politics of the stomach have a broader impact on the very people living in those communities, and it's absolutely important that the police and as well as the SANDF and the private securities turn the tide immediately and get a grip on the protests that we're seeing completely spiraled out of control.
Nozintombi Miya, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for that